We're at Daru's Strengthening Disability Advocacy Conference in Melbourne, and I have here two of the keynote presenters for the first session. Anne, could you introduce yourself, and then Vasiliky, please?
So I'm a professor at Melbourne University and academic director of the Melbourne Disability Institute.
And I'm Vas, and I'm one of the community researchers that works with Anne, and I'm severely hearing impaired. Got about 10% hearing and rely completely on lip reading, and I also have psychosocial disabilities, so you can't see those. And I've been working out through the Disability Research Institute for the last couple of years now.
Fantastic. Now let's start talking. Well, we can't talk very long because you'll get rushed off, but about the research that you presented today. Let's talk first about on discrimination and bullying for people with disabilities. They're pretty shocking stats.
Yes, so we've shown that people with disabilities have much higher levels of discrimination than people without disabilities. Around 25% reported having discrimination in the last year, and 50% of that was due to their disability. But we think that's probably a bit higher than that. Some people mightn't recognise some of their discrimination as related to disability. And then the bullying is really disturbing. Young people with disabilities experience about double the levels of bullying as adolescents without disabilities, and perhaps even more disturbing is that some of our research has actually shown that that about 50% of the differences in mental health that we find for young people with disabilities, they have lower mental health than people without disabilities, is actually due to their exposure to more bullying. And I guess...
Sorry, and I think some of the interesting things that you brought up were about the actual impact of bullying and discrimination, which we understand theoretically, but you've been working around findings around racism too, about actual...
Bringing those in, yeah. So
what is that telling us?
Well, the work around racism is really quite compelling. And over many years, exposure, that the research on racism suggests that there's all kinds of internal effects. It basically gets under your skin. It's related to high levels of blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, premature ageing, as well as all the mental health effects. So even though we haven't done all that work with people with disabilities in relation to discrimination, it's the same kinds of processes. And our hypothesis is that discrimination is really affecting the health and well-being of people with disabilities, and for young people, their learning outcomes and lifelong outcomes they experience as a result of childhood adversities relating to bullying.
And was there anything you wanted to pull out about the intersectionality there there's clearly a gender impact with bullying for women with disabilities? There was some really interesting, terrible findings about people with intellectual disabilities.
Yeah.
But there were some nuances to that.
Well, in terms of violence, like we find in the general population, women with disabilities have experienced much higher levels of intimate partner violence, and also much higher levels than women without disabilities. So women with disabilities are very vulnerable group when it comes to sexual and intimate partner violence. In relation to the bullying, I think one of the striking things about that was not so much the gender stuff, but the intersection with bullying and disadvantage. So young people who are both disadvantaged and have a disability were at even higher risk of experiencing bullying than young people who were advantaged and have a disability.
And what does that tell you? Well,
I guess that they're probably kind of getting a double whammy, really, of discrimination and bullying, and that's incredibly troubling, because from both angles they're disadvantaged, and there's kind of multiplied. That's what we mean. It's a multiplicative effect or additional effect. It means having them both is worse than having either alone, and they kind of interact with each other to make them much worse. Yeah.
Now, I'll come back to you on the importance of data and your project that you've got underway soon, but if we could talk to Vasiliky now about the community survey. You've been involved community attitude survey. What have you been looking at and what are you finding? And perhaps after that we can talk about the actual process too, which has been innovative but long overdue.
Yes. Well, the community attitude survey is measuring attitudes that people have towards people with disabilities, and the survey includes participants in the survey can be have been people with disabilities and people without disabilities, and can talk to you more about the sampling and that sort of stuff. But and so our role in that was to bring our lived experience into the research team, and so we were there from pretty much the beginning of the process. I think just a little bit of the ethics work had been done, some of the more bureaucratic sort of ethics paperwork, which is quite substantial, literature reviews and that sort of thing had been done. But we came on board at the time when things were really getting put together. So, and so our role was really to provide that lived experience of disability. What that allowed us to do, as community researchers, is, and because there's such a broad experience sort of background mix amongst us as well. Okay, so we're all very different to one another. And we have lots of similarities, but also very different to one another. So you've got people from all sorts of different backgrounds on the team.
Sorry, and you talked on stage about how that's not been the case in traditional academic research. You've been seen as subjects. Tell me about what's important to turn that around.
Yeah, look, historically in universities, not just in Australia but across the world, people with disabilities have been what I call it a subject of research. And really what that's involved is a lot of people plotting, investigating, doing things to us, to our bodies, and subsequently having a really negative impact on our lives because some of that research has been really poorly done as well. Okay, so obviously we've gotten better at that over time. Probably one of the reasons that ethics committees exist, amongst other reasons, human ethics committees. So we've been the subjects of research, and for a long time, people with disabilities, their families, their friends, carers, have been saying very, very loudly that we don't want to be subjects of research. It's actually doing it wrong as well. So, you know what I mean? So that's been, I guess, the politics around that within the community, and a really strong push. Now, and so we've used a method called participatory action research. It does have some other names as well. People call it some different things. But PAR for short is actually a research process that puts people with disability, places people with disabilities in the research process as experts. And the research is led by people with disabilities. And that might sound, to a lot of people, might be a bit sceptical. I know I was when we first, and I'll be honest with you, I was quite sceptical of how that was going to work because, you know, for so many years you hear politicians, a whole bunch of people that have the power to make a real positive impact on the lives of people with disabilities lying to us. Okay, so the trust there hadn't been great. So I was thinking, wonder how this is going to work. But actually, the method has worked really well for us because obviously one thing is Anne's leadership, and then the whole team and the way that the method works and people's commitment to that method. And that has meant that academics like Anne, who has spent decades researching, and she's amazingly knowledgeable, have had to take a step back and listen to people. Not that Anne doesn't do that, but I'm just giving you an example of how the dynamics of the team works.
And is that would that be what your takeaway message would be to others? You know, what is the key message to other
The key
researchers?
message is that, firstly, don't underestimate the quality of research coming out with these methods. If you have a really close look at it, what you'll actually see that, of course, depending on your research question, how you go about doing the method, but if you're conducting research about people with disabilities, you don't do it about them, you do it with them. And the methods itself actually have some real strengths over some of the other methods that we could use. Things like really basic stuff, like for the survey, we had a blank template with some criteria, some areas that the government had set for us to work the survey around. And then we had to come up with the questions. So if you don't come up with the right questions in the survey, you are not going to get the answers that you're looking for, and the quality of your data is going to be very poor. So one of the things we bring into that process is that because we have lived experience of disability, we are able to help guide in what the right questions are to actually be asking and how to construct those questions.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, the findings of could we briefly touch on the findings and then the way ahead?
Okay, well, in terms of the findings of the community attitude survey, I just want to make a kind of clarifying point, is that they're still quite preliminary, so that's why we didn't actually present a whole lot of them today, and they will be released later this year. I think some of the striking things about what people thought was that people don't really know how to act towards people with disabilities. 80% of people said they don't know how to act. A large portion of people said they didn't know whether to ask people for help. And I think that's an opportunity for us to start to think about, well, how can we work with the community to start to break down those barriers for interaction and enable people to feel so empowered to be able to interact. Because what happens is there's also the avoidance that happens. And there's also, and we showed that particularly for people with mental health, there's something like schizophrenia, there's a huge amount of avoidance of those people. And there's, so I think there's a need to work with communities so they can start to learn that, people with disabilities, we're just kind of normal. We're just part of life. Disability is normal. Yeah. They're just part of life, and so we need to be able to talk together and be together. And so we don't want people to feel scared or pitiful, pity us or avoid us. We want to be able to build bridges. And I think if in 5 years' time we saw that changing, and we felt that people were respecting us more, then it might actually change things. So I think there's, as much as the findings are kind of a bit shocking in some ways, they're also hopeful, because I think we can build on those opportunities. Yeah.
Now, the other thing that you identified is we need data. You're rolling out. Tell us about the campaign.
Well, we haven't really started the campaign.
Right.
But we, at the Melbourne Disability Institute, and a range of people around the country have started talking about the need for data. We talked about it at our launch. Australia has some of the most comprehensive data on disability in the world, and particularly with the rollout of the NDIS. At the moment, nobody is getting access to that data. It's being held by the agency, for instance. There is some improvement in getting access to data through ABS and some other integrated data sets, which we're really excited about, and we can do a lot more interesting work, particularly into relation to things like employment and so forth for people with disabilities. But what we have as a gaping hole at the moment is really understanding the NDIS, and I would argue the integration of the data on the NDIS into some of the other data sets, so we can actually see what are the employment outcomes for people who go through the scheme. What do they move into work? What are the other kinds of, what are the health outcomes? Is there reduction in the kind of health services they need? Is it actually, and then feeding in other surveys like the National Health Survey, is it leading to improvements in health? Without that, we can't answer what are key questions and really the reasons why we got the NDIS up to start with.
So tell us the details of the campaign. How can people watch out for it?
Keep an eye on the Melbourne Disability Institute website, and really we hope to start this going in the next month or so. And we're talking about it as democratising disability data.
Yeah.
And really our hope is to bring universities, advocacy groups, service providers, governments, if they want to be on, along together to think about what we really need to do to be able to get the right evidence to improve the lives of people with disabilities. We've got this grand natural experiment happening here in Australia, nothing like it in the world, and we need to learn by doing to make it better.
Thank you so much to you both.